Morning, everyone. Hello, welcome back to day 3 of the Data for Good Festival. It's wonderful to have you here, wonderful to have you back with us. If today's your first day, wonderful to have you with us. I'm Giselle. I'm the Executive Director of DataKind. We're a charity that helps other charities use data and data science. I'm also one of your festival hosts, and I'm here just to introduce the day for a few minutes before we get started with our first session. So first thing I have to do, and if you've been around for a few days, you will know that I want to say thank you to everyone that's made this happen. So our 27 festival partners who have been absolutely amazing. You'd have heard loads of them speak throughout the festival, and they've really kind of created this wonderful data for good environment and ecosystem that we all work in. So thank you for coming together to work together on the festival. Of course, thank you also to our sponsors. We have the wonderful Softwire, the Data Lab, who you'll be hearing from very shortly, actually, Teradata and Sale Data Bank for giving us support, and to Grantmaker Esme Fairbairn Foundation, who gave us the funding to get the show on the road. And to you, thank you for being here. I hope you've had a good couple of days if you've been around. I'd love to hear from you, your reflections so far, whether they are on our topics, whether they are on the kind of nature of the festival itself, whether they're insights you've learned from people that you've been talking to in the networking as the festival's gone on. Please do share them in the chat here in Hopin, on Twitter, by emailing us, by DMing us. I'd love to hear from you. If you think to yourself, okay, that's all well and good, but how do I navigate around this thing? And you're new to Hopin, I will point you to the navigation bar on the left-hand side, the thing that says stage and sessions and networking. That essentially they're all, you can imagine them as doors to rooms in our virtual conference hall, and click on them, have a bit of a play around, and you'll find yourselves in all those different places and be able to enjoy all those different functions. If you want to say hi to people, switch from left to right hand side of your screen, where you'll see a list of people, and you can click it and kind of scroll to the bottom, load more, and then you can go through that list. And if you think, oh, that's an old friend, or maybe, oh, that's a new friend, you can click, have a DM, and even request a video call if you'd like. That's a bit about Hopin. If at any time you do get stuck and you need a bit of support, the people who are really going to help you out. So these are names to remember: Sophie Flanagan and Claire Nicholson. Find them on that people list that I just mentioned and say help, and they will come and sort you out. So that's a bit about Hopin. Looking outside of Hopin, please do be social as you navigate around sessions, in the form of the networking we have, but also in the form of things like Twitter and LinkedIn. Share your experiences, and let's see if we can kind of involve each other in the outside in our virtual universe as well. So today we have an amazing lineup. We've had 2 days of amazing lineup. Today is not going to be any different. We've got 24 events throughout the day, starting imminently. I would, before I kind of sum them up, I would recommend making the most of the networking function before we all depart and the festival ends this afternoon. If you're an attendee, that means breaks and lunchtime. That's when the networking function's open. If you're a grant maker, work for a grant maker, you've got an additional session hosted by 360 Giving that you can find in the programme as well, for networking. So our first session of the day is called People Sharing Data, by the wonderful Rachel Coldicutt. Many of you might know from Rachel's amazing energy and impact in growing .everyone, an organisation that really put kind of, I'd say, community-centric responsible tech on the map in the UK, and helped organisations to use data and tech responsibly. Rachel's going to be talking a bit about how we make sure that the data mesh, data structures don't just reinforce old power structures that we're not a fan of. I hope Rachel can correct me if I'm completely summing up a little bit too much, but I stick around in the next few minutes to hear Rachel talk about that. Throughout the rest of the day, we have so much great stuff going on. You can hear from loads of organisations about their data journeys. So Parkinson's UK, Charity Digital Trust, Sustrans, Citizens Advice, Working Families, We Farm, Home Start, Intercare, Guys and St Tommy's Foundation, and UNICEF's Data for Children Collaborative. That's quite an amazing list. And we're not even done. We've got how-to sessions on Tableau, on supercharging your Excel use. Nothing wrong with Excel. It gets a bad rep, but we love it. Making the most of Microsoft Cloud for nonprofits, and how to use the beautiful, rich survey data that comes from the Understanding Society survey. We have a bunch of stuff on data diversity in communities. We've got EDI Scotland. We've got the ODI running a data ethics workshop. We have I'm really curious to see the output of this one, a structured discussion on how we can collect data, better data about place. We've had a lot of interesting place-based discussions the last few days, and this one is not one where it's very much a presentation, opposite of presentation, a discussion with all those who are going to take place, and I'm really keen to see where we get to. And we've got a wonderful train the trainer session, so to help you communicate data with non-technical folk, put you in the driving seat to do that and take that back to your organisations and communities. We also have the Excellent Data Lab, festival sponsor and doer of loads of great data for good work. They're going to be talking a bit about what they do after Rachel. We've got Pro Bono Economics talking about why we need better data about the sector. You'll hear from me and my colleague Dulcie on the role data science has to play in the social sector in early afternoon. And we have 5 big impact, small cost, the best combination of words, big impact, small cost, tips from Nest about how to use your data within your organisation. So what a day. I hope that you will stick around and enjoy some of those sessions. As I've said on other mornings, I hope you will take a moment out for yourself and see this as a kind of development time where you can really kind of get stuck into some new things and push some of those pings and beeps and distractions to the side if you can. As every day, we'll be announcing 4 today, 4 prize winners at the end of the day for our most active in the chat, most active in the networking, most active in the expo, and that's what we'll be doing every day. And today we've got a bonus, most active on Twitter throughout the festival. So if you fancy getting a bit interactive, meeting people, having a chat, you might get a nice little prize of a wonderful Data for Good t-shirt and or a book on data strategy. We've got some on data feminism, some on data transformation, some on visualization, loads of books, all ready to be gifted to you. So do get typing away. Okay, I think that's everything from me. I'm now going to hand over, a few minutes late, sorry everyone, to the wonderful Rachel Coldicutt to talk to us about data, power and communities.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? I have not shared my slides. Hang on a minute. I'm not sure what to do. Hang on a minute. I think something is away on my screen. That's my fault. There we go. It's good to start any sort of talk about technology by getting it wrong. And so, hello everyone. Good morning. It's great to be here. I'm Rachel. I am going to talk to you today about maybe something slightly different that you haven't heard as much about over the last couple of days, which is not just how you can think about the data in your organisation or in the sector, but really data out in the world. And why, I'm really on a mission to get the voluntary community and the sector much more involved in thinking about the impact of data generally. And this is something I do all the time. I run a tiny research organization, and we work with governments and businesses, and we run our own projects that try and kind of work out the change that technology is making in the world and try and make that better for everyone. And so what I am going to talk about today is people shaping data, which is very different to something you probably heard a lot about, which is sharing the data. And I want to kind of help us to think about this a little bit more kind of actively out in the world, and consider the ways in which data is used in society. Because, like, if you have been paying attention over the last year, I think it's become really clear that actually a lot of the ways that data has been maybe informing policies, decisions, the way the world works, have been coming out of databases into real life. You know, we've had this extraordinary moment where we've had the Saturday night, the primetime TV graphs. Like, that is not a thing I thought would ever happen. But actually, what, you know, it becomes more and more important as data becomes more prominent in influencing how the world works, that more of us get to influence it and change it. Because although, you know, maybe you when you're thinking of data, you're thinking of zeros and ones, or databases, or lists of information, it's important to realize it's not neutral. Data is a way of thinking about and understanding the world, and to kind of, you know, it's okay to think I can't query an algorithm because I'm not a technologist. But actually, as a person who is interested in equality, in justice, there are lots of ways to engage in data, how it's created, how it's organized, because just like any way of thinking about things or describing the world, data tends to reflect a view. So lots of the ways the world is organized now, you know, they are structures that we've inherited. Like, data has been organized and analyzed over the last maybe 300 years into structures and ways of understanding that reflect the interests of the people who get to organize it. And they reflect the ways that those people see things being connected and related. So, you know, for instance, I don't really have time to go into this now, but, you know, a lot of the ways that we think about how animals and the plants are described, that all goes back to how one man, Linnaeus, thought about that in the 18th century. It's not that animals and plants are all definitely connected in the ways that, you know, the kinds of ways he break it down are the only ways of doing it. There are lots of them. And I was reading a paper actually last week about how in the natural world, there are lots of organisms and entities that are not described because they have not been perceived to be interesting enough. And this is totally something that kind of moves over into the world of people and things as well. And I guess the challenge I have for you is that how can we together think about making the world that data describes as inclusive as possible. And again, this may feel to you like this isn't really your job, like that there are other people who maybe are here to do that. But again, if we stop thinking of data as being like a technical thing, and we think of it as something that influences the way the decisions are made, and if knowledge is a power, data is kind of supercharged power. And although many of us are not going to get to be the people who make the decisions, there are ways that we can influence the data that goes into those, that we can, make sure that people are counted equitably, that we're all visible to the same extent. I will come to this later, but there are definitely communities in the UK who are both overcounted in certain data sets and underrepresented, and so how can we kind of get that to be more equitable? And it really is important because there is probably not an area of your life that has not been touched by data in some way. It's like from the incredibly trivial, what you're going to watch on Netflix or what's advertised on Facebook, all the way through to, if you're in trouble, how likely are you to have a bail decision? Are your children more likely to be taken into care? Are you likely to be escalated on the list to have the vaccine? These are all things that are kind of intimately tied up with data, and because of that, I think that we all have a democratic duty to make sure that data is as good and honest and representative as possible. So, like one example of kind of how data goes missing is like in all the COVID presentations that we've seen that have included data about footfall, and have been working out, how many people are on the train, how many people are driving or using public transport. That data was partly co-created by Apple and Google. So what that means is only people who had phones and who took the phones out to move around were represented. And we know from Ofcom that I think it's 12% of people in the country don't have smartphones. What you're doing here is you're over representing the movement of younger populations. You're missing out children. You're not including older people who are less likely to have phones. So in choosing the source of the data to understand how people were moving around, there was a choice that was made there. Over the last year, an amazing team of people have been working on an algorithm to understand the relative risk that different communities are at of COVID. And in order to understand that, there's a number of bits of information that were taken into that algorithm. So it's like there's maybe 40 or 50 different variables. Many of them don't apply to everyone because they're about health conditions, but some of them apply to all of us. That includes your name, gender, weight. And there's something called the Townsend deprivation, score. And this is a score that is based on the census that happened in 2011. And based on your postcode, it's a predictor of the likelihood of you living in poverty. And what was interesting, when this algorithm was created, some of the most frequently missing data in people's medical records was their ethnicity, their weight, and their Townsend deprivation score. And so those are things that all have a bearing, were then estimated. And if we think about kind of, maybe it never occurred to anybody that that information would become absolutely critical, but it means that maybe some of the most important decisions that are being made about people are based on kind of the best guesses. And there's a real duty, I think, to like continue to scrutinize and uphold that, like, you know, good standards for that data. Kind of moving out of COVID into other examples of times that the data like has not really worked. So about 4 years ago, the Metropolitan Police were running an algorithm that estimated the likelihood of young black men, mostly, almost entirely, being at risk of being in gangs. And it turned out that what that algorithm couldn't differentiate between was people who'd been a victim of crime and people who'd perpetrated a crime, you know, and so it just didn't work. And it meant that in the matrix overall, what was happening is that the characteristics of a young black man were being mixed up with those of the gang member, and this was really important because actually being on the matrix could affect your access to housing, benefits, work, education, you know, and so that's a really important thing to get wrong. This is from 2018, and I believe it's like a case that is rumbling on. The way that a number of insurance companies were working out the rate of people's car insurance, for some reason, was using people's name as an indicator of risk. And one of the things that came out is that if you were called Mohammed, you were likely to spend £1,000 more on car insurance. And if you think about it, if you think about all the assumptions and biases and perspectives that have been nested in that choice, it's obviously very problematic. Moving on to better news, this year in 2021 is the first time that the sex and gender information was collected in the census. So it's the first time that sexual orientation data was collected, which is amazing that we could get to 2021 and not have been asking those things. However, it was not without problems. I think not long before the census was published, the High Court deemed that people who were trans and non-binary had to state either the sex at birth or on their gender recognition certificate, which meant that actually that left, you know, a relatively large number of people in a position where they couldn't claim the correct data point for them. And that actually, you know, there's the kind of last important aspect of this is that it's not always appropriate for everyone to be counted. It isn't always safe. And this is a great artwork by Mimi Onua that like explores what is missing, who is missing. It's a set of filing cabinets that has empty files to show, you know, the times that when children have been killed at crossings, who isn't counted, who is. It shows the number of times that disability data hasn't been taken into account. You know, so there's a lot here. It's very complicated, but I think as people who are working with communities, representing people, upholding justice, you know, we all have a duty to be thinking about who is represented and how. Because at the moment, really, it's like a tussle between the market and the state. We're all putting data in. We're getting services out, but it's not a transparent. It isn't transparent. It isn't open to scrutiny, and it is not a just, resilient ecosystem. And I would say that how data is collected, described, and organized, and how we understand the world is too important to be left to the market and the state. You know, there's a commitment in government to interrogate and join up more and more data without, I believe, the appropriate safeguards. Meanwhile, the Facebook, for instance, they're able to do things like they have a customer record for people who don't have the Facebook accounts. You know, it's like you don't even have to be a Facebook user to be tracked. And I think it's really important to say that this is too big for us as individuals, right? You know, one of the things that technology does do is it individualizes us. It puts us in our little cubby holes where things are, you know, can be really personalized. But really, what we need to be trying to do is not just think about us as individuals, but think about us as communities, as societies, to be sort of more collectively minded. And because of that, like as I said at the start, I'm on a mission to find different ways to engage community organizations, charities, policy makers with the way that data shapes outcomes. Because shaping data shapes the future. And I think that's something we're all here to do. And I'm going to leave you with a few questions and a couple of examples of projects I am working on at the moment. And so that the first is like, if you think about the challenges that you experience the day-to-day, month-to-month, how can data more accurately reflect your people, the places, communities, what is missing, who is missed out? This is really tricky. Like, can collecting more data about people from minoritized groups lead to better decisions, or will it lead to more surveillance? And I think this is like a really tricky and important thing to be holding and scrutinizing and balancing and talking about. how can communities be empowered to shape data about them in ways that are not exploitative? You know, I feel like, you know, there are not very many straight white men who've been asked to do code design, right? And that how can we create kind of new conduits, new connections, ways of thinking about things that empower other kinds of groups? And lastly, how can community the wisdom turn into the kind of data we were looking at earlier? How can the things you're seeing day to day on the ground become as influential and important as other kinds of data? And they're all huge, you know, they're big, chunky, difficult questions. And I know everyone has enough to do. But we've got a few different things happening that if you're interested, you know, there's a potential to join in. So, excuse me. Last year, I was lucky enough to work in a group running the community tech fellowship. We work with 9 leaders in the Greater Manchester area, helping them to think about and challenge the way that data and technology were kind of moving through their communities, and to think more critically about that. And we're just designing the next round of that at the moment, and the fundraising. And I think this could be a really powerful way of engaging kind of a different kind of scrutiny and thinking. Coming up, I'm really excited to say we've got a programme that has been commissioned by the National Lottery Community Fund to start to bring different kinds of data into a full site framework to show that actually it doesn't just have to be McKinsey who think about things like the future of work, that actually the intelligence and the data that lives in communities can turn into, I think, really powerful insight and foresight. And lastly, I co-run a meetup that happens kind of every other month, where we get about 60 people together who are interested in these kinds of issues. And if you are, come along. The next is 9th of June. So thank you. I've kind of rattled through loads of the things, but I hope that was interesting. And if you would like to follow up, get in touch. Thanks a lot. Now, I just need to work out how to do my screen. Hang on. Let me turn off the screen. There we go.
Thank you so much for that, Rachel. As has been clear in the chat, that I'm sure you haven't had time to look at as you've been speaking, but loads of things popping up. You've got a lot of praise, also a lot of what I'd call emphatic nodding as well, and even some links being shared on relevant content. So I'd recommend everyone go to that and have a look. Please do put your questions in the Q&A for Rachel. We've got a little time now to get into conversation. I'm going to kick us off with the most upvoted so far from Ali Hanbury. Where do you see the possibilities for ethical intervening in the data journey, i.e. design, capture, analysis, implementation, etc.? So yeah, great question there about process and where we do this thinking.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think it's a practice. I don't think it's a stage, you know, And so at every moment, there needs to be a process of questioning, considering, challenging, because I think very often, you know, particularly when you're collecting data about things you've maybe not really thought about previously, as new connections become exposed, as kind of new things come out, the things you presumed at the beginning change, you know. And I have certainly worked on projects where, you know, at the beginning the spec is to do X, and you get to the middle and you realize it's achieving Y. And so one of the things I would really encourage you to do, if you can, is not only to work with data scientists, but to work with sociologists, researchers, to have like different stage gates where you are kind of checking and verifying that the data you're collecting kind of continues to do the thing you thought it did, and kind of exposing any of the flaws in your both thinking and practice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, wholehearted agreement from you, most definitely on that. We're 7 past, we've got until 10 past, so perhaps time for maybe 2 more questions. The first of which we've got here from, I'm really sorry if this isn't how you say your name, I would say Julia Di Lorito. I'm sorry if that was not correct. Do you think we can or should develop general guidelines for the creation of data sets in order to limit the possibility for biases, being them about gender, race, income, etc., to arise?
I mean, the thing is, right, if you live in a structurally biased society, it's going to be impossible to prevent those coming out, right? And that actually, I think, back to what I was saying previously about it being a practice and it being a muscle to learn, and that it's not just about how data is collected, it's about how data is used. And for instance, and I'll be really quick, you know, talking to charities who work with migrants, for instance, who may be very concerned about having data collected about them, you know, there's no better data schema that is going to prevent a person being deported, you know. So I think what you really need to think about is how the data is used in the world as well as how it's structured.
Well, perhaps in my next question, some of that answer also applies. But just in case there's anything more to say, Alistair Alexander says, I completely agree that we have to challenge the assumption that more data is always better. What rules should organisations use to decide when and when not to collect data?
I gave a talk about, maybe about 1.5 years ago now, where I was talking about the idea of just enough internet, right? And what I mean by that is you know, we don't need to collect the data speculatively, right? Collect exactly what is needed now. You can always get more, right? And don't go looking for patterns where they aren't needed. I think, like, at the time I gave that talk, something amazing like 68% of the data that was collected was not structured in a way that could be analyzed, you know. And so actually I think I would always just try to be lean and curious, I guess.
Which is as interesting that I think I talked to perhaps kind of companies who are like data companies, you know, I guess the Facebooks of this world, and that approach would be anathema. You know, it's not lean, collect only what we need to use now. You know, absolutely not. So perhaps that is one way where the social sector can kind of significantly differentiate itself and go down a different path than we've seen kind of private industry go down.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. Your talk absolutely wonderful to listen to, and I suspect our audience heartily agrees, given the comments and questions. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Great,
it's been wonderful.
No, thank you. Bye bye.
I'm now going to introduce. I think we have Alex. Oh, as if by magic. So we've got Alex speaking today about the work of the Data Lab. So without any further ado, I will hand over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Giselle. I'm just going to share my screen and hope that that's working. So thanks so much for having me. I'm Alex Hutchinson. I work at the Data Lab, and we're really delighted to be able to sponsor the Data for Good Fest this year, and take the opportunity to talk to you about one of our Data for Good stories that we have within the Data Lab. So my role at Data Lab is director of the Data for Children collaborative with UNICEF, and that is going to be our little case study example of some work that we've done from the Data Lab. But first of all, I will talk to you a bit more about what the Data Lab is, in case any of you don't know. So we're based up in Scotland. We are an innovation centre, so Scotland has got 8 innovation centres that work in different sectors, and ours is a kind of cross-cutting data innovation centre, data and AI, and we help Scotland maximise value from data and lead the world to a data-powered future. And we do that through our hubs in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen and Inverness. And we've got really 3 pillars of work where we focus. So we foster innovation through collaboration. We build skills and grow talent through things like MSc programs. And we also champion Scotland's data science community. And that's partly why we wanted to support the Data for Good Fest, is because we're really all about bringing people together, sharing information, sharing learning, sharing stories. So the Data Lab acts as a catalyst, using expertise, network, funding and platforms to change how Scotland and the world can innovate with data. So let me get on to my specific area and the Data for Good case study that I wanted to talk to you about today. So the Data Lab was really instrumental through its sort of supporting organisations to collaborate in setting up a new initiative in September 2019 called the Data for Children Collaborative with UNICEF. It's not the prettiest of names, but it does explain a little bit what we are. So we're a partnership between UNICEF, the Scottish Government and the University of Edinburgh. And our vision is to enable improvement in outcomes for every child. So we draw on the strengths of our partners, those 3 partner organisations, but ultimately we're actually trying to reach further into their network and bring together different academic organisations, public sector, private sector. They bring insight and solve problems in a collaborative way, and really focused on using data and data science techniques in a really responsible manner. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that as well. But the Data Lab has been the sort of incubator for this initiative, using the models that the Data Lab has in terms of being an agile innovation centre and applying those to how we run these collaborative projects. So a bit more depth on what kind of projects I'm talking about. So we run a portfolio of projects. We've got around, I think, 10 live projects at the moment, being delivered by teams all across the world, and really using, the working from home technologies to the maximum. We look across a number of priority themes. So those are poverty, population, COVID-19, nutrition, mental health. We just kicked off a climate change theme as well. And then we've got a handy category of ad hoc, where we apply other projects that seem to fit with our vision and our way of working. And so to go into a little bit more detail about just some example projects, if I pick on population, for example, we've got a project using satellite imagery to understand if we can better be able to model population estimates by knowing where rooftops and buildings are. So training machine learning algorithms to map out areas of rural Mozambique to then translate that across into, this is where people are, this is where children are, this is where mothers are, and therefore this is where UNICEF needs to focus its vaccination programming. So that's one example, and we use a lot of open data in that as well, but trying to build that in a way that means it can be passed over to UNICEF and they've got a sustainable way of working. Another example, so on mental health, we've just started a project in Jamaica looking at whether online digital platforms, how are they used by Jamaican adolescents? Who's engaging with what demographic? Is it boys 15 to 19 using WhatsApp, or is it girls 19 to 23 using Facebook? So that UNICEF again and their partners can appropriately program any mental health interventions and target them in the right way. So those are a couple of example projects that we've got going on. And what I kind of wanted to talk to you about is the approach of how we've set this whole thing up and how we're working collaboratively to do that. So the highlights of the last 18 months in terms of us being a collaborative have been kind of just defining what we actually are. So I'm not sure that three large organizations coming together necessarily knew in advance what exactly this thing was going to be. And I think by us really setting our stall out and our ways of working and getting our culture really out there and understood, we've been really focused on defining what we stand for and why things are important to us. We've been building a network, and that's another reason for getting involved with you guys today, because I'd love for some of you to be engaged in some of the work we're doing and think about the opportunities that we have for joining collaborative teams that we pull together. So yeah, building a network of expertise, really focused on the fact that no one team's got the answer to these big questions that we're trying to solve for UNICEF and other customers. And this is about how do we bring together people in a diverse way to look at things with a new lens and an innovative way. We've got a really diverse project portfolio. So you saw the themes there on the last slide, but what we're trying to do is look at where the linkages are. And I think for me and my team, having that oversight of these themes and seeing where they touch upon each other. So how does nutrition touch on poverty? How does poverty touch on COVID-19? And so many of our work patterns or people and patterns that we're working on in these projects actually come and link across each other all the time, which is great to see. And clarity on who we are, so enabling others to make impact. And actually, one of my colleagues from the Data for Children Collaborative is talking at one of the sessions later today around midday on how we talk about impact within the Data for Children Collaborative. I know that's a challenge for everybody, and Fraser's going to give a bit more light to that, but we're trying to just make it really clear that we act on behalf of our customers. So UNICEF, as I mentioned, the example of vaccination programming or mental health interventions, we are we are the catalyst to enabling them to make the impact. So our projects are that sort of the stage before the interactions with children on the ground. So that's the kind of highlights of what we've learned in the last 18 months. In terms of how we work, I think we're really, really keen to share and make accessible all the tools that we've built up over this last period, because we want others to be looking at how to do responsible innovation. So we built up a suite of tools. The little visual on the right kind of talks you through the stages that we go through as we're setting up a project. And what we're always trying to make sure is that these are adding value to the project design. We absolutely can't deal with the tick box exercise of an ethics assessment and youth participation, and going through our legals, for example. We are trying at every stage to make sure that we're increasing the value of the project, the design of the project, through using these tools. We're particularly proud of our ethics assessment, which we've then gone on and helped the Scottish Government develop an ethics workbook for their COVID-19 data response projects. And we're also really, really excited about what our youth participation workbook does. And some of this touches on what Rachel was just talking about always checking in with the people that you're working on something for. Youth participation is a big topic for our organizations in our field, but I sometimes feel that it's maybe not trying to do it as meaningfully as it should be doing. So on to the how do we make it work? How have we made it all work? So understanding, communicating across organizational priorities and drivers sounds like a really, I don't know why I've written that sentence in quite that way, but we've got three big organizations, as I mentioned, who all have a slightly different outlook on what they feel success is for us at the Data for Children Collaborative, and being able to open the lid on those, make them really transparent and open, and thereby getting your sense of direction and travel from those, and just being really clear about what we can and can't do for those organizations has been instrumental in building trust and gaining their kind of backing and making sure that we're getting visibility within those organizations so that we get the right people engaged, because there's a whole set of skills and expertise that we want to leverage from those organizations, but they're big and complex and political, and we have to have ways and means of knocking down any barriers and building that trust. I've already briefly mentioned culture. So our values and our culture are so intrinsic to how we work, and so we basically stamp them right from the beginning of any interaction that we've got with any of these collaborative teams we're working with. So the people that come and work with us, so we do a process called impact collaborations, where we've got a challenge question, we push it out to our network, we get expressions of interest that come back in from, as I said, multiple academic, public sector, private sector organizations, and then we do a review of those expressions of interest, and we bring those teams together and we workshop and build a project together. So we co-create that workshop, and that values and culture piece that we as a team work to has to ripple out to those other teams coming in. So we work really differently from how the University of Edinburgh works. They are our host, that's where we reside, but any of the academics that are coming in and working with us kind of adopt our approach and adopt our sort of relaxed atmosphere, agile, can do, every problem is solvable kind of approach to how we're working together. And I think that's been really important to get those teams being happy together and wanting to have success in their projects. Having an inspiring goal tends to bring out the best in people. I mean, that sort of seems obvious, but I cannot tell you how lucky we have been with the types of people that have been working with us. And I know that this audience here at Data for Good Festival will be a similar type of people. We want to help children ultimately, and there's no better goal or job that brings people together to do that. Diversity in skills and expertise doesn't only help project delivery, but it also increases the capabilities across the teams. Again, I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but we have experienced so much upskilling of people just by the fact that they're working together, using different tools, using different methodologies, and that interdisciplinary sharing of information. You can just see people growing month by month as they're working together across these collaborative teams. And bringing the end user into the project from the beginning really looks at how we're, sorry if that pops up, I've got a little Teams invite there. Oh no, I've just, sorry, clicked buttons. What's really important to us is maximizing and making sure all these projects have some impact on children's lives through that customer. As I mentioned, we're the catalyst to having that impact. So what we found is making sure we get the challenge question right at the beginning by working that through with the customer, and then having them through our workshop as we're building the project, and through the project, you've then got this, automatic route to having someone engaged who's sponsoring it to maximize the adoption and the sustainability. We cannot do what we're trying to do if UNICEF just sends us a question and leaves us to it, and then at the end of 9 months or a year on a project, we go back to them and say, here's your machine learning algorithm that you wanted. That's not going to work for us at all. We've got to have UNICEF subject matter experts in the room week by week, fortnight by fortnight, whatever the pattern of communication is within that particular project, and have them through that, because they are the way to reach the context, to reach the country offices that we're working with, and our stakeholder groups across all of these projects are absolutely massive, but it's got to be done that way. We've got to deliver in that way. And again, back to Rachel's presentation there, we can't just be doing to people, we've got to do with people. So that's the kind of summary of a Data for Good story from the Data Lab. The other sort of segue that I wanted to just jump in on while I've got you guys here is to mention that we have our Data Fest happening. So this is, year 5, I think, of Data Fest the Data Lab runs, which again is about our community building. So, really similar to what Giselle and her team are delivering here, a set of really engaging and interactive talks. And we've got, it's a really quite a complex virtual situation. Normally it's 2 weeks in Scotland in March, but with COVID impacts, we're doing a week in May, a week in September, a week in October. So I was just going to mention that next week we've got a series of talks on data futures is the theme for next week. And there's some data talks on the 18th with Robin Windsor, who's an influential futurist. And then also on the 18th in the afternoon, we've got a data tech session, which is, could be an interesting event for all of you guys, which is Ellen Friedman and Albert King on data science, AI, trust and ethics. And then I'm not sure if this one would be of interest. It's an event for students and employers, and that's about data talent. So that's a bit of bringing together students and employers. So happy to share the link on the chat to get tickets, and also because you guys are attending Data for Good Fest, I've got a code available for a free ticket for the data tech events if anybody's interested, and apparently it's really hard to find the promo code button, so I was told to put an arrow on a screen for you all here. So I can drop those elements into the chat if anybody is interested in coming. And I've really spoken about 3 organisations through this chat. So if anybody wants to take a photo of a screen of all of our Twitter, LinkedIn websites, we've got the Data Lab, the Innovation Centre, the Data for Children Collaborative, Data for Good Story, and Data Fest as well. So happy again to share all of that information with you. Giselle, I think I'm going to stop screen sharing. And I think Giselle was going to come back on.
Hello. I did a hard reset Chrome at the exact wrong moment. So thank you so much, Alex. We wanted to do a few questions, but I think we are out of time now because we're a little bit behind, and I want to make sure everyone gets a few minutes before our next session starts at 10:35. But I think we've all got those various details. Thanks for being so generous with all your different hats. And I know everyone can get in touch if they want to. I'd also add my hearty recommendation for the Data Fest. It was the last thing I did before the pandemic. Was Dulcie and I went up to Scotland and took part in the Data Fest last March. So it has a warm place in my heart. Then the world changed. So yeah, I'm sure the online version is equally as wonderful, and I definitely recommend it. So thank you so much, Alex. At this point, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you and goodbye.